Chapter 1, The Domineering Mother and Her Love for Earning Money. Vermilion Empire. Mother, I heard there's a bun shop in the Western Mountains that uses human meat as filling. With so many people here, how much money do you think they could make? 4-year-old Peter Blake stuffed 2 gold nuggets he had just dug up into his pocket and toddled into the grand hall, asking loudly. Clara Blake, who was lounging with her legs propped up while sipping tea, nearly spat it all out. This little rascal, his mind is full of mischief. Truly a chip off the old block, like mother, like son. Peter Blake, do you know which type of meat is the most delicious? Clara Blake set her teacup down and turned to ask her beloved son. Peter Blake shook his head. Meat cut fresh from a living person is the most tender and flavorful. Using it as filling for buns makes them even more exquisite. It's said that the bun shop does exactly that, which is why even though people know the buns are made with human meat, they're still willing to spend a fortune just to taste them. Clara Blake placed her teacup down gracefully and descended from her high seat. Her white dress fluttered elegantly, and her stunning, makeup-free face was so breathtakingly beautiful that it outshone ordinary maidens, exuding an irresistible allure. Really? So, will these uncles also have their flesh sliced off piece by piece? Peter Blake asked innocently, his rare phoenix eyes flashing with a sly glint. I'll confess. I'll confess everything. Please, merciful goddess, don't sell me to the bun shop. The bandit leader cried bitterly, wondering what sins he had committed. Once a proud king of the mountain, he now found himself in this dire situation. Initially, he thought he had struck gold, capturing a beautiful woman to make her his wife. However, before he could even touch the hem of her dress, all his brothers on the mountain were defeated by the little boy in front of him. He was certain that the woman hadn't lifted a finger, absolutely not. It was all the doing of the young boy, without a doubt. To save his own skin, the bandit leader finally revealed the location of all his hidden gold. Looking at the pile of gold, silver, and jewels before him, Peter Blake grinned widely. His chubby hand reached out, brushing over the treasures, which instantly vanished without a trace. Peter Blake touched the small spatial ring on his plump finger, chuckling endlessly. Jackpot! Jackpot! Clara Blake cast a seemingly casual glance at the bandits' hideout but said nothing. She simply pulled her son along, walking away arrogantly, leaving the group of penniless bandits dumbfounded under the open sky. Henry Owen, crouching on the roof to watch the commotion, suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Could that woman have discovered him? He had just released his divine sense to probe the cultivation level of the mother and son, but to his shock, the divine sense he sent out vanished completely, as if it had sunk into the ocean without returning. Clearwater City, the capital of the Vermilion Empire. She had never thought she would one day return to this place, to Clara Blake's homeland. Yes, the Clara Blake of the past was no more. The Clara Blake of today was simply Clara Blake. I am not originally from this world. Through some twisted fate, I ended up here, caught in a melodramatic tale of soul possession. When I woke up, I discovered I had become a pregnant woman. Thankfully, I arrived just in time to save the unborn child, whose fragile breath still lingered. Perhaps it was a mother's instinct, but I couldn't abandon this tiny life. Dragging my injured body through the desolate forest, I managed to find some herbs to consume, ultimately saving the baby within me. However, 2 months after the child was born, an unexpected illness struck. Peter was diagnosed with a rare blood-drying condition that required numerous precious medicinal ingredients to preserve his life. As the head of the hidden Dan sect in the 21st century, I possessed exceptional alchemy skills. If I could craft the blood essence pill, Peter's illness would be cured. But the ingredients for this pill were priceless treasures, incredibly difficult to obtain. Your Grace, is it true that there's white blood herb in Qingyang City? If we can acquire it, will Peter's condition finally be cured? Chapter 2, The Clever Child's Path to Fortune. Peter Blake's slightly pale face was filled with excitement. If he recovered, would that mean no more bitter medicine for him? Clara Blake gently stroked her son's head, her perfect lips curving into a faint bitter smile. Her heart ached slightly. Peter was so young yet had to endure such suffering. She wished she could take all the pain on his behalf. With the white blood herb, I can refine the life-extending pill for Peter. Once Peter takes it, we can go together to find the ingredients to make the blood transformation pill. Clara explained. Peter had the right to know. She had never hidden his illness from him, nor would she lie to comfort him. She hoped Peter would have the strength to face all hardships and strive to overcome them. She would always be by his side, always. Peter's face showed clear disappointment. His mother had worked so hard to find the white blood herb, and he thought it was the ingredient for the blood transformation pill. But it wasn't. Don't worry, Peter. With me here, you'll be fine. Do you trust me? Clara crouched down, looking at her little treasure in front of her. This little one brought her endless joy and warmth. Yet, her heart ached. Every full moon, Peter's illness would flare up, causing unbearable pain, pain that no ordinary person could endure. Yet Peter, even as he bit his lips in agony, would smile and tell her it didn't hurt. Heaven knew, every time he said it didn't hurt, her heart felt as if it were being stabbed by 1,000 knives. Peter nodded firmly. With you here, I'm not afraid of anything. The ingredients for the life-extending pill were almost complete, with only the white blood herb missing. Clara had taken Peter through deep forests and mountains, visiting countless large and small trading houses, but they hadn't found any trace of the herb. 3 days ago, at a pharmacy in Phoenix Town, she heard news that Owen Trading in Qingyang City would host an auction where someone intended to sell 5 white blood herbs. 5 herbs, just enough to refine the life-extending pill. This time, she had to obtain them. Whether by purchase or by force, she had to have those herbs. However, Owen Trading only opened its doors to nobles and royalty in Qingyang City. Ordinary people weren't allowed entry. Just like now, Clara and Peter were stopped outside the trading house. What? You think I can't afford to pay? Clara tried to remain calm, telling herself to stay composed. But with the auction about to begin, this damned gatekeeper still refused to let her in. If she couldn't get the white blood herb today, she swore she'd kill his entire family. The gatekeeper was momentarily stunned. He had seen many women call themselves aunties, but never such a stunning beauty referring to herself that way. Oddly enough, it added a certain charm. Apologies, but you truly cannot enter, the gatekeeper said, maintaining his calm demeanor despite Clara's obvious irritation. She's with me. Step aside, a voice came from behind Clara. A man dressed in luxurious silk, fanning himself with a folding fan, smiled confidently. His air of nobility was undeniable. This presence felt familiar. Clara raised an eyebrow and turned to look at the gatekeeper. Didn't you hear? Step aside, she said. The gatekeeper, recognizing the well-dressed man, quickly bowed with a flattering smile. Second young master, you've arrived. Please, come in. He stepped aside, and the maids nearby rushed to lead Henry Owen inside, competing to serve him. The treatment was a stark contrast. Uncle, do you have money? Peter asked, his slightly pale but strikingly handsome face lighting up with a smile. Henry Owen pondered for a moment before replying with a grin, let's say I do. And you, do you have money? Looking at the adorable boy, Henry couldn't help but smile. The events at Green Breeze Camp were still fresh in his mind. Peter shook his head, his expression turning forlorn. Hashtag Chapter 3, The Fool Who Walked Right In. My mother doesn't let me spend money. Even if I like something, she won't let me buy it. You're such a kind uncle, you'll buy stuff for Peter, won't you? If Henry Owen hadn't visited Tan Fung Fort and witnessed the mother and son antics of these two, he would have surely been fooled by Peter's innocent and pure demeanor. Seeing Henry Owen hesitating, Clara Blake raised an eyebrow and called out to Peter, "Didn't your mother tell you to stay away from broke and stingy men?" Ah, men, always prideful. Especially in front of women, and even more so in front of beautiful women. That urge to show off just gets stronger. What does Peter want? Uncle will buy everything for you, Henry Owen boldly declared, holding Peter's hand. Peter Blake winked at Clara Blake, his face smug with self-satisfaction. Thank you, Uncle. If I see something I like, I'll let you know right away. You're the best. Watching the mother and son put on their act, Henry Owen suddenly realized he was like a duck caught in a trap he had dug himself and willingly walked into. The venue was an auction house capable of accommodating thousands of people, resembling a mini football field. At the center was a platform for displaying items, surrounded by tiered seating. Each seat had a number representing the identity of the buyer. In Clearwater City, most notable figures had fixed seats and numbers. They would send representatives to attend every auction to hunt for treasures. If a rare item appeared, these big shots would personally show up. For example, today, the white blood herb, a medicinal plant used to craft the gathering essence pill, would be featured. The white blood herb was nearly priceless nowadays. Even if people didn't need it immediately, they would buy it to keep for emergencies. A maid led Henry Owen to the VIP section on the second floor. Peter, sharp-eyed as ever, immediately spotted the numbered plaque on the main seat and grabbed it. Henry Owen's face twisted. It seemed this little rascal truly intended to bid on items he liked, using his money. Clara Blake glanced sideways at Henry Owen, laughing silently to herself. Running into a fool who delivered himself to her doorstep like this, what a rare stroke of luck. May I ask the lady's name? Taking advantage of the time before the auction started, Henry Owen struck up a conversation with Clara Blake. My name is Peter Blake. Of course, my mother's surname is Blake too. Don't you know that? Peter Blake gave Henry Owen a disdainful side-eye. What? His name is Peter Blake, what does that have to do with his mother's surname? I am Henry Owen. May I ask for your name, miss? Henry Owen took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, putting on what he believed was his most handsome face. My mother's name is Clara Blake, and my name is Peter Blake, Peter Blake replied, cutting him off while still observing the auction floor. It was unclear whether it was intentional or not. Clara Blake? Why did that name sound so familiar? But for the moment, he couldn't recall where he'd heard it before. The auction officially began. The first few items were martial arts manuals, which didn't stir much excitement. High-level manuals would never be brought to an auction. The ones sent to trading houses were usually of lower caliber. While waiting, Peter had fallen asleep at some point. Clara Blake gently covered her son with a cloak, her hand softly brushing his slightly messy hair. Henry Owen stared blankly at Clara Blake. Could this cold, strong woman from Tan Phong Fort really be the gentle and tender woman before him? "Where is Peter's father?" he suddenly asked, realizing how abrupt it sounded right after. Clara Blake remained silent, her gaze fixed on her sleeping son. Without looking up, she coldly replied, "Dead." For some reason, hearing the words, "dead," made him feel an odd sense of excitement. Chapter 4, outpaced by the little kid. Finally, it was time for the auction of the white blood herb. Peter, who had been sleeping soundly, immediately sprang up upon hearing the words, "white blood herb," and raised the number plate he was clutching tightly to his chest. Henry Owen's face darkened. So, this was what the kid wanted, white blood herb. Did he even know how expensive this thing was? Henry approached Peter, smiling ingratiatingly, and said, "Peter, it hasn't started yet. You're not supposed to raise the paddle now. Let me hold it for you, okay?" Peter pouted at his words, his eyes shimmering as if tears were about to fall. Henry Owen instantly surrendered. "Fine, you can raise it. Raise it however you like." Peter's face transformed, lighting up like a blooming flower. Number 78 bids 1,000 taels. Number 80 bids 3,000 taels. Number 12 bids 6,000 taels. 10,000 taels, in gold. A clear, childish voice rang out from the VIP section on the second floor. Everyone curiously looked up to see a little boy in white holding up his number plate, his appearance utterly adorable. Beside the boy stood a man and a woman. The woman wore a white dress, unadorned yet exuding an elegant beauty. The man radiated nobility. It was none other than Henry Owen, the second son of the Owens bloodline family. Henry Owen frowned. Spending other people's money without restraint, 10,000 taels, and in gold no less. 10,001. 10,002. 10,003. 50,000 taels, in gold. Peter Blake raised the number plate high, his sweet voice ringing out. Using someone else's paddle to buy something for himself, it was utterly delightful. The auctioneer's face darkened. That paddle clearly belonged to the second son. Was the second son deliberately sabotaging his own family's business? If this continued, it would surely incite public outrage. "Hey, Henry Owen, what's the meaning of this? Are you intentionally driving up the price? Do you think we're fools?" Finally, someone couldn't hold back anymore. Rising from the crowd, they pointed at Henry Owen on the second floor and shouted angrily. With someone leading the charge, others naturally chimed in. In no time, the auction hall descended into chaos, with people loudly accusing Owen trading of unethical business practices. Henry Owen was so aggrieved he couldn't even speak. He had brought this upon himself, digging his own grave. A loud boom echoed as a section of the roof near the display platform suddenly caved in, creating a massive hole. A shadowy figure swiftly darted inside. In the blink of an eye, the jade box on the display platform was snatched away by the shadow. Clara Blake's expression turned icy. Her agile figure darted from the second floor, as swift as a bird, pursuing the shadow through the hole in the roof. "Henry Owen, take care of Peter for me." A secretive voice reached Henry Owen's ears. "Mom, Seeing Clara Blake chasing after the shadow, Peter hurriedly threw down the number plate and leapt out of the VIP area, chasing in the direction his mother had disappeared. Henry Owen, unable to think much, immediately chased after Peter. High-ranking guards hidden within the trading hall also emerged, giving their all to pursue the thief. Two figures, one black and one white, flew through the sky above the Sapa forest outside the city, their movements graceful and lightning-fast. The man in black clearly hadn't expected anyone to catch up to him despite his exceptional agility. In the Vermilion Empire, no more than 5 people could match his speed, and the woman chasing him was certainly not one of them. Clara Blake's expression was grave as she closely pursued the man in black. Judging by his build, he was a man with remarkable agility. While she wasn't left behind, it was also difficult to close the gap. Clearly, his skills were on par with hers. However, perhaps she had overestimated him. After running several miles, the man in black suddenly stopped and turned to face Clara Blake. "You're not from the Owens bloodline family. Why are you interfering in someone else's business?" The masked man's voice was icy, his eyes cold and piercing. Chapter 5, damn it, I've been played. I only need the white blood herb. Leave the white blood herb, and I'll pretend I never saw you. Clara Blake silently formed a seal, gathering her energy, ready to strike. Humph. Do you even know what happens when you offend the Skyfire Hall? The man seemed unwilling to drag things out further. He apparently hoped that upon hearing the name Skyfire Hall, his opponent would step aside on her own. Clearly, Clara Blake was a disappointment to him. Skyfire Hall or Earthfire Hall, I don't care. Hand over the white blood herb, or don't blame me for being ruthless. The energy in her hand had already gathered. If not for the concern over the white blood herb in his possession, she would have struck without hesitation by now. "Mommy, Mommy," a childish, tender voice echoed from afar, and in the blink of an eye, the chubby and adorable Peter Blake appeared behind Clara Blake. The man in black widened his eyes in shock. How could such a tiny child move so quickly? It had taken him over 20 years of training to reach his current level. "Don't come any closer." Clara Blake swung her palm, sending a gust of force to push Peter Blake away. The man in black suddenly reached into his chest and pulled out a white jade box. "This is for you, stop following me." He threw the white jade box to the ground, his figure swiftly disappearing into the distance. Clara Blake saw this, raised her hand, and released a powerful suction force from her palm, pulling the white jade box towards her. Opening the jade box, it was empty inside. "Damn it, tricked again?" At that moment, a thick cloud of smoke surged forth. Realizing something was wrong, she hurriedly ran toward Peter, but there was no trace of him anywhere. Peter Blake, come out now." She frantically searched everywhere but couldn't find her son. "Clara Blake, where's Peter? Have you seen Peter?" Henry Owen noticed Clara Blake in a daze and quickly ran over to ask. Just now, Peter's movement technique was incredibly fast, and Henry couldn't keep up. If it weren't for his natural dog-like sense of smell, tracking the scent to this place, he certainly wouldn't have found it. Slap! A crisp sound echoed as Clara Blake delivered a thunderous slap across Henry Owen's face. "Are you even a man? Didn't I tell you to take good care of Peter? Is this how you take care of him?" Henry Owen covered his face in pain, momentarily stunned. Her son was missing, but why hit him? He wasn't the father of her child, nor was it his responsibility to look after her son. Yet, Those words were swallowed back before they could leave his lips. Seeing her dazed expression, he felt a pang of sympathy. The pain on his face seemed to fade away. At that moment, a group of guards arrived. Henry Owen shouted angrily at them, "You useless lot! What's the point of keeping you around? The person has already escaped, and now you show up. Go after him. He kidnapped the child who was with me earlier. You must find him, hurry!" The guards scattered in pursuit, leaving only Henry Owen and Clara Blake on the mountainside. "Where is the Skyfire Hall?" Clara Blake suddenly looked up and asked Henry Owen. Henry Owen was startled. Why was she suddenly asking about the Skyfire Hall? Could the man in black earlier be someone from the Skyfire Hall? A sense of foreboding crept into his heart. "What if it's the Skyfire Hall?" he asked. Clara Blake nodded, her eyes filled with murderous intent. She didn't care if it was the Skyfire Hall or the Earthfire Hall. If they had taken her son, she would ensure their lives became a living hell. Henry Owen felt a sudden headache. The Skyfire Hall operated outside the bounds of law and morality, often referred to as the Evil Hall or Demon Hall. They rarely initiated conflict, but once they targeted someone or a group, that target would typically be wiped off the face of the earth in no time. "You don't have any grudges with the Skyfire Hall, do you?" he asked cautiously. Henry Owen cautiously asked. "The old lady doesn't even know what the heck the Skyfire Hall does, so what kind of grudge could there even be?" She shot a frustrated glare at Henry Owen. The more she looked at him, the more annoyed she became. This kid couldn't even keep an eye on Peter properly, what a useless fool. At this moment, her gaze practically etched the word, worthless, onto Henry Owen's forehead. ##### Chapter 6, The Crafty Kid. Pretending to be clueless, there wasn't any grudge before, but today, between her and Skyfire Hall, there definitely is one now. Skyfire Hall has only been established for less than 10 years, yet it's already become one of the top powers in the Vermilion Empire, not to mention the entire Star Moon continent. Its Hall Master, Julian Quinn, is an unpredictable force, commanding the 18 Black Knights under him. Each of them possesses profound cultivation and roams the Star Moon continent, rarely encountering any equals. What's the point of talking about all that? I'm asking you where Skyfire Hall is located. Clara Blake glared at Henry Owen. Did he think that by telling her how powerful Skyfire Hall was, she'd give up on finding her child? Skyfire Hall, Hell's Palace, it didn't matter. She would storm in regardless. Cherry Blossom Town, a small town less than 10 miles from Skyfire Hall's headquarters. Ethan Moore, after running for his life for quite some time, finally slowed down. In a deserted alley, he placed the child on his shoulder down and muttered, "Humph, don't blame me for being ruthless. Your mother ruined my plans." Luckily, the white blood herb wasn't lost, otherwise, your little life wouldn't be spared. Peter Blake, who had been lazily half-closing his charming eyes, suddenly opened them wide and stared at Ethan Moore in front of him. With lightning speed, his small hand grabbed Ethan Moore's vital pressure point and, with a sly smile, said, "Uncle, flying while carrying me was so much fun. I fell asleep without realizing it." "Why did you stop flying, Uncle?" Ethan Moore kept groaning in distress. This kid, did he accidentally press on his pressure point, or was he deliberately pretending to act crazy? After inhaling his knockout incense, how could he wake up so quickly? "Little friend, let go of me first. Uncle will buy you some delicious food, and we can talk slowly, alright?" He tried to remain calm and coax him gently. Peter Blake shook his head vigorously like a drum. No way. If I let go, Uncle will run away, and I won't be able to catch up. So it was intentional. Damn it. He was Ethan Moore, the swallow, and now he was being threatened by a kid. How pathetic was that? Uncle won't run, Uncle won't go anywhere. Let go of Uncle first, okay? Ethan Moore lamented his fate. This kid's grip alternated between strong and weak, and he was genuinely afraid the boy might accidentally crush his pressure point. If he died, that would be one thing, but dying at the hands of a child? If word got out, wouldn't people laugh their heads off? I don't want Uncle's life. I just want the white blood herb. Give me the white blood herb, and I'll let you go, Peter Blake said, his face full of a sweet smile, repeatedly calling him Uncle. He didn't look like he was threatening anyone at all. But the sweeter Peter smiled, the more Ethan Moore felt chills running down his spine. This kid, despite his cheerful grin, made people feel entirely uneasy, as though a cold wind was blowing through them. This feeling, he could only sense it from one person. Speaking of that person, the kid in front of him and that person bore an 80% resemblance. Those rare and stunning peach blossom eyes were identical, as if carved from the same mold. Let's talk this over slowly, let's talk this over slowly. Let go of me first, and I promise I'll give you the white blood herb. Ethan Moore coaxed sweetly. After all, it was just a child, probably easy to deceive. As long as it let go, he planned to escape immediately. Peter Blake smirked slyly and shook his head. My mom said that deals between honorable gentlemen must be fair and square. You're the gentleman, and I'm the rogue. You hand over the white blood herb first, and then I'll let you go. Ethan Moore suddenly felt that his IQ was truly no match for this kid. Peter Blake gripped Ethan Moore's pulse point, the pressure alternating between strong and light. Grinning mischievously. Sorry, Uncle. Peter's hands are tired, they're trembling. If I accidentally squeeze you to death, don't blame Peter, okay? Peter didn't mean it. Ethan Moore gritted his teeth, furious. The white blood herb, which he had obtained through countless hardships, was just going to change hands like this? Hashtag chapter 7, you, the gentleman, I, the scoundrel. This was the gift he intended to give his junior apprentice sister. She wanted to refine the essence-gathering pill, and the main ingredient was white blood herb. It was something he planned to use to confess his feelings. But in this world, what could be more important than one's own life? First, he needed to trick this little devil into releasing his acupoint, regain his freedom, and then take back the white blood herb. Finally, Ethan Moore took out a white jade bottle hidden in his chest. The bottle was tightly sealed, yet the distinctive fragrance of the white blood herb faintly wafted through, invigorating anyone who caught a whiff. I've already said, a gentleman's transaction is straightforward, money for goods. Shall we release each other at the same time, all right? Ethan Moore raised the jade bottle, bargaining. Peter Blake shook his head. That's a transaction between a gentleman and another gentleman. Right now, you're the gentleman, and I'm the scoundrel. You hand over the white blood herb first, and then I'll release you, Peter replied with a carefree smile, showing no urgency. Ethan Moore grew frustrated and raised his hand high. I don't care. If you don't release me, I'll smash it. You know that once the white blood herb is removed from its soil, it must be stored in a jade bottle. If it touches dust, it will lose its potency. You understand what I mean, right? Ethan Moore thought he had found a way to handle Peter Blake, but unexpectedly. Peter Blake remained indifferent, grinning mischievously. Go ahead, smash it. At worst, my mother will find another white blood herb. She'll get it no matter what. But your little life, as he spoke, his chubby little hand tightened its grip, causing Ethan Moore's heart to race in panic. He quickly surrendered. Don't. My little ancestor, I yield, all right? I yield. Here, take it. Ethan Moore, utterly helpless against this little rascal, gave in. Taking the white jade bottle from Ethan Moore, Peter didn't miss the cunning glint in his eyes. Smiling slyly, he pocketed the white blood herb into his spatial ring and released Ethan Moore's acupoint before turning to leave the alley. Ethan Moore rubbed his wrist, his expression unreadable as he let out a cold snort. Kid, you're too green. Just wait until you're poisoned. The white blood herb will still be mine. At that moment, Peter's small, adorable head reappeared at the corner of the alley. Grinning mischievously, he said, Oh, I forgot to tell you, Uncle. The poison you smeared on the bottle? I wiped it all over the back of your hand. You'd better take the antidote quickly, or it'll be too late. Bye-bye, Uncle. Ethan Moore hurriedly raised his right hand to inspect it. Sure enough, the back of his hand was black and purple, a sign of poisoning from his own unique toxin. This little rascal was quick, so quick that even he hadn't noticed. Frantically, he reached into his chest for the antidote, but after rummaging for a long time, he couldn't find it. He was certain he had placed it there. Where could it have gone? Just then, Peter's small head popped out again from around the corner. Uncle, I just picked this up. Is it yours? Ethan Moore looked and gasped. Wasn't that his precious antidote? How had it ended up in the kid's hands? Quick! Give it to me! He lunged forward, trying to snatch the antidote from Peter Blake's hand. Peter Blake nimbly dodged, smiling cheekily. My mother says that things you pick up don't have to be returned. Ethan Moore was frantic, nearly on the verge of tears. My little ancestor, please give it back. If you delay any longer, my hand will be ruined. Peter Blake remained as carefree as ever, showing no concern. Tay uncle being crippled, what does it have to do with me? I wasn't the one who poisoned him. Uncle, go find the one who poisoned him. Ethan Moore's face turned dark immediately. The poisoner? The poisoner is currently poisoned themselves. What do you want in exchange for giving me the antidote? Ethan Moore felt helpless. Aside from his agile movements, he had no martial arts skills at all, and he couldn't fight anyone. Facing this little child in front of him, he truly had no way to deal with them. Hashtag Chapter 8, want the antidote? Pay up! Peter Blake shook the antidote bottle in his hand, grinning widely. Simple. Name a price that satisfies this young master, and I'll sell it to you. Expecting him to spend his own money to buy an antidote for himself? Is there no justice left in the world? Clearly, talking about justice with Peter Blake was pointless. To save his precious hand, Ethan Moore reluctantly pulled out all the banknotes he had on him, 30,000 silver taels, 10,000 gold taels. This was the money he had saved up to get married, and now it was all snatched away by this brat. Watching Peter Blake swagger off into the distance, Ethan swore that if he ever saw this kid again, he would stay at least 8 feet away. Whose fault was this? He was the one who brought Peter back, and Peter was the one who poisoned him. Peter Blake cheerfully left the alley and stood on the bustling main street, watching the crowd pass by. He suddenly froze. where was his mother? If she realized he was missing, she would surely be worried. His eyes darted around, searching for her graceful figure. As the sky darkened and the streets grew quieter, Peter began to feel scared. His mother had never left him alone, not once. "Mother, why haven't you come to get me yet?" He tried to hold back his tears, his small figure looking so pitiful in the cold wind. At the far end of the street, under an ancient pagoda tree, a shadow caught Peter's attention. Normally, he wasn't the type of child to meddle in others' business, but for some reason, the shadow beneath the tree seemed to have an inexplicable pull, drawing him closer. It was a man, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his lips dark and discolored. Under the mottled shade of the tree, his features were hard to make out, but the purplish hue of his lips suggested poisoning. Peter reached out to check the man's breathing. Realizing he was still alive, Peter quickly retrieved a white porcelain bottle from his spatial ring. The words, "Clear Toxin Pill," were inscribed on the bottle. This was a pill his mother had personally crafted, originally intended for auction at a trading house, but temporarily entrusted to Peter. His mother's voice echoed in his ears, "This clear toxin pill is worth at least 30,000 gold taels. Don't lose it, it's your mother's hard work, so take good care of it." Peter shook his head, deciding that saving a life was more important. His chubby little hands pried open the man's jaw and stuffed the pill into his mouth, using his energy to guide the medicine down the man's throat. He then took out another bottle from his spatial ring, this one containing ancient spring water his mother had discovered in a primeval forest. Using this water to refine pills enhanced their medicinal properties. He poured some of the ancient spring water into the man's mouth and took 2 sips himself. Overcome by drowsiness, Peter collapsed onto the stranger's lap and fell into a deep sleep. A child as vigilant and clever as Peter would never normally fall asleep in a stranger's arms, but today, he seemed truly exhausted. Strangely, this unfamiliar man gave him a sense of security. As dawn broke, sunlight bathed the earth, and the sun rose in the east. The man leaning against the pagoda tree stirred, his thick lashes trembling slightly before his eyes snapped open. His almond-shaped eyes, cold and sharp, radiated a chilling hostility. His piercing gaze scanned the surroundings but found no enemies as he had anticipated. Memories flooded back like a torrent. He had been poisoned, unable to speak or move, helplessly watching as his 18 iron cavalrymen passed before his eyes without being able to call for help. After 5 years, he had fallen victim to her poison again. Was she too cunning, or had he been too careless? His almond eyes brimmed with murderous intent. That woman deserved to die. He would ensure she experienced every torment imaginable, making her life worse than death. Just as he was about to move, he felt a small figure pressing against him, a little boy sleeping soundly. The child's soft black hair fluttered gently in the morning breeze, and a patch of drool had soaked through a large section of his pants. The sensation was strange. Despite his usual obsession with cleanliness, he didn't feel disgusted. Chapter 9, Uncle, are you my father? He poked the child's cheek with a finger. Hey, little one, wake up. For some reason, the boy had fallen asleep on his lap. Given his personality, he could have easily tossed the child aside and walked away. Peter Blake groggily lifted his head, rubbed his eyes, and finally saw the man before him clearly, recalling what had happened. Uncle, you look so much like me. Are you my father? Peter Blake stared in astonishment at the man before him. That face, it resembled his own by at least 80%, just as Little Chubby's father resembled Little Chubby. Peter studied him, and the man studied Peter. It wasn't rare for people to resemble each other, but this child's eyes, they were exactly like his. "What's your name? Where are your parents?" A hint of gentleness appeared on his impossibly handsome face. "My name is Peter Blake. My mother's name is Clara Blake. She told me my father died a long time ago." "She lied to me, didn't she?" Peter Blake looked at him expectantly. Though he had never said it out loud, deep down, Peter really wanted a father, just like other children who had both a father and a mother. Clara Blake? The name didn't ring any bells in his mind. He had no women by his side, had never married, and certainly couldn't have a son. Suddenly, he remembered an incident from 5 years ago and hastily asked Peter, "How old are you this year?" 4 years old. "You're my father, aren't you?" Peter Blake blinked his strikingly beautiful eyes, staring at him intently, hoping he would nod and admit to being his father. The man shook his head. "I don't know. You should ask your mother." "Where is she?" Perhaps he should meet the boy's mother. Peter Blake lowered his gaze, disappointment written all over his face. This man likely wasn't his father. If he were, how could he not know his mother? Peter shook off the disappointment, his usual cheerful smile returning as he grinned and said, "Uncle, last night you were poisoned and unconscious. I used my mother's detox pill to save you." The man was taken aback. So that's what happened. No wonder he felt the poison in his body had completely disappeared. He had been wondering what had occurred, so it was this little rascal who had saved him. The corners of his lips couldn't help but curl into a smile. He squatted down in front of Peter and spoke gently. "Peter Blake, thank you for saving my life. I will definitely repay you someday." Peter Blake shook his head, grinning widely. "My mother says if you want to repay someone, you should do it immediately. If you wait too long, the repayment loses its value. Uncle, repay me right now." The man was speechless. This kid was certainly amusing. "All right then, how do you want me to repay you?" Peter extended his chubby little hand toward him and said, "First, you need to pay me back the cost of the medicinal ingredients. That's 5,000 gold coins. Then, you can repay me an additional 5,000 gold coins. Not too much, not too little, exactly 10,000 gold coins. Hand it over." The man's usually calm face twitched involuntarily. This brat, did he think gold coins were as common as dirt? 10,000 gold coins, and he said it so casually. "Uncle, do you not have 10,000 gold coins?" Peter sized him up and down. "Uncle, you look very wealthy. There's no way you don't have 10,000 gold coins. Don't you want to repay Peter anymore?" The man's eye twitched again. How did he look wealthy? Did his face have 10,000 gold coins written on it? How do you know Uncle has 10,000 gold coins? He was genuinely curious about what went on in this child's mind. Peter pointed at the man's clothing. "Your outfit is made of black snow silk, worth thousands of gold coins. The sapphire embedded in your belt is worth at least 5,000 gold coins. The hairpin on your head, made of eternal cold jade, is an invaluable treasure, worth at least another 5,000 gold coins. And you're saying you don't have 10,000 gold coins?" Chapter 10, Want cash, not IOUs. The man looked at Peter with a gaze that held a hint of admiration. This kid truly knew his stuff. But he wondered, who could have raised and taught such a sharp child? His curiosity about Peter Blake's mother only grew stronger. But I didn't bring enough money today. Take this token, you can go to the Heavenly Flame Hall anytime to collect 100,000 gold coins. He handed Peter a black jade token. Peter quickly accepted the token but shook his head. My mother always says, unless absolutely necessary, never accept random IOUs. Who knows if your IOU is even valid? The man burst out laughing. Indeed, the boy's mother had taught him many clever things. When you go to the Heavenly Flame Hall, just say Julian Quinn sent you. 100,000 gold coins, not a single coin less, Julian Quinn solemnly assured Peter Blake. Peter Blake, however, shook his head again. I don't trust that. How about you leave something with me as collateral? Once I get the 100,000 gold coins, I'll return it to you. How does that sound? Julian Quinn pointed to the black jade token in Peter's hand and chuckled. Didn't you just take my token? Peter replied, this black jade token is worth only a few thousand silver coins. How could it possibly cover a debt of 100,000 gold coins? Julian Quinn glanced at the blue jade piece on his waist and inwardly chuckled. Then tell me, what do you suggest? Sure enough, Peter Blake pointed at the blue jade pendant on Julian's waist and the icy jade hairpin on his head. If you leave these two items as collateral, I might reluctantly accept. Peter Blake grinned, his eyes gleaming with greed. His mother had always said that missing an opportunity to make money was like defying the heavens. Others might not understand why Clara Blake, despite her considerable wealth, was so obsessed with amassing more. But Peter understood. His mother did it all for him. Peter was born with a severe illness. No matter how high his aptitude or how fast his martial arts training progressed, he couldn't escape the harsh reality. His illness was life-threatening and could take a turn for the worse at any moment. To prolong his life, his mother needed to purchase countless rare medicinal herbs. Until Peter's illness was cured, their need for money was like a bottomless pit. No amount would ever be enough. Fortunately, his mother had a highly lucrative profession. The pills she refined often sold for exorbitant prices. Peter's ability to survive until now was largely due to the vast quantities of medicine he consumed daily. For him, rare herbs were as commonplace as daily meals. Chapter 11, let me go, stop talking nonsense. He stood up, heading toward the pastry shop across the street to grab a bite before looking for his mother. If she couldn't find him, she would undoubtedly be very worried. As he walked halfway, a sharp, excruciating pain suddenly struck him. The familiar discomfort was unbearable, and though he tried to grit his teeth and endure it, he realized this time the pain was even more intense. Beads of sweat, as large as peas, rolled down his pale, delicate face as he collapsed in the middle of the road, writhing in agony on the ground. Hey, kid, get out of the way. A luxurious carriage approached Peter, and the driver cracked the whip toward Peter Blake. What's going on? A calm, deep male voice came from inside the carriage, questioning the driver. Your Highness, there's a child lying in the middle of the road, the driver respectfully replied. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a young nobleman dressed in lavish silk stepped out, frowning slightly as he looked at the child rolling on the ground. The small, pale face was filled with pain. He looked familiar. This was clearly the same child who had caused a scene at Owen Trading yesterday with his outrageous bidding. Bring him into the carriage. A faint smile appeared on the handsome man's face. It had only been a day, and yet rumors had already spread among the people, claiming that this child was Henry Owen's illegitimate son. If he truly was Henry Owen's son, then Henry Owen owed him a great favor. The carriage sped away, carrying Peter Blake, who was in so much pain that he was on the verge of losing consciousness. Not long after the carriage departed, 18 riders stormed through the streets, searching everywhere but ultimately leaving empty-handed. Meanwhile, at the foot of a mountain 10 miles from Cherry Blossom Town, Clara Blake presented the invitation Henry Owen had given her, using the name of the Owens bloodline to request an audience with the master of Phoenix Flame Palace. It was certainly easier than a nameless woman like herself trying to gain access. However, even with the name of the Owens bloodline, Phoenix Flame Palace seemed unwilling to show any courtesy. She waited at the foot of the mountain for a full hour but still received no permission to ascend. Worrying about her son's safety, Clara's anxiety grew. Today was the full moon, and if Peter didn't take the life-sustaining pill before the moon waned, his life would be in grave danger. At this moment, every second was precious to her. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Palace Master, someone has broken into the palace, claiming loudly that Phoenix Flame Palace kidnapped her son and demanding we return him immediately, or else what? Julian Quinn frowned, coldly staring at the guard. Or else she'll erase Phoenix Flame Palace from existence, the guard relayed nervously, cold sweat dripping down his back, fearing the wrath might fall on him. How audacious! Palace Master, allow me to handle this, Julian Cena, the left guardian standing beside Julian Quinn, said fiercely, his face full of murderous intent. Kidnapped her son? Julian Quinn pondered for a moment before abruptly standing up. Taking the mask handed to him by Julian Cena, he swiftly left the study like a gust of wind. On the martial training ground, a graceful figure in white was fiercely battling the right guardian, John Cena. The woman's elegant movements resembled a celestial maiden descending to earth, and though her techniques were strange, each strike was lethal and precise. Despite her cultivation being lower than John Cena's, her formidable martial skills kept her from falling into a disadvantageous position. However, if the fight continued, she would inevitably face defeat. John Cena executed a deadly move. The woman bent backward to avoid it, her long black hair cascading down like a waterfall. Her beautiful face was filled with determination and killing intent. At this moment, John Cena launched another fatal attack. The woman in white, seemingly exhausted, struggled to dodge unscathed, but it was unlikely she could do so. Julian Quinn's figure swiftly appeared on the training ground. He extended his hand, wrapping it around Clara Blake's slender waist, narrowly avoiding John Cena's critical strike. Clara Blake stared in shock at the man before her, not because of his handsomeness, as he wore a mask that obscured his features, but because of his eyes. Those rare, mesmerizing almond-shaped eyes were identical to Peter's. Chapter 12, Return My Child. What? Never seen a man as handsome as I am? Julian Quinn tightened his arms around Clara Blake's waist, a sly smirk playing on his lips. It was only then that Clara Blake snapped out of it and realized she was still in his embrace. She gracefully turned and freed herself from his arms. Who are you? I don't have time to waste words with you. Call your master here to meet me. Clara Blake's face was full of irritation. She despised being touched by others, especially men. Any man who dared to lay a hand on her without her permission usually ended up incapable of taking care of himself. But this man before her, just from his aura, she could sense that he wasn't someone she could mess with easily. It seemed that if she wanted him to pay the price, she'd have to plan carefully. How dare you? Such disrespect to the Lord. John Cena, clearly lacking awareness, failed to notice the ambiguous tension between the two. Julian Quinn waved his hand, signaling John Cena to step back, then turned to Clara Blake. "I am the Lord of the Scorching Heaven Hall. May I ask what business you have? So young yet already the Lord? Isn't the position of Lord usually held by old men? The people of the Celestial Temple have kidnapped my son, return him to me immediately." Son? In Julian Quinn's mind, the face of Peter Blake suddenly appeared, a small face that bore an 80% resemblance to his own. Every move the child made seemed to stir his heart deeply. "Your son, is his name Peter Blake?" He looked at the woman before him, thinking of Peter's pale, delicate face. A sense of foreboding surged within him. Clara Blake felt a surge of joy in her heart. He knows Peter, which means Peter is truly at the Celestial Temple. Thank heavens. Yes, that's right, Peter Blake. Hand him over to me now. At this moment, she could no longer care about Julian Quinn's expression. She only wanted to know where her son was, whether he was safe, and if he had enough to eat. Just then, the 18 Iron Cavalry appeared on the training ground. Seeing the 18 Iron Cavalry return empty-handed, Julian Quinn's face instantly darkened, and he shouted angrily, "Where is he? You can't even find a child?" The leader of the 18 Iron Cavalry, Kokutsu, quickly stepped forward, clasping his hands as he reported to Julian Quinn, "Master, when we arrived, the person was no longer there. We heard that he was taken by Second Prince Charles Anderson of the Vermilion Empire." Julian Quinn shook his head. "Impossible. Peter is very clever, he would never easily go with a stranger." Kokutsu spoke again. "I heard the boy suddenly collapsed unconscious, seemingly due to a relapse of an old illness, blocking the carriage of the second prince, which is why the second prince took him away." A relapse of an old illness? Today is indeed the full moon, the day his sickness usually flares up, but in the past, it always started in the evening. Why has it happened so early this time? Julian Quinn caught Clara Blake, who was staggering and about to fall. Seeing her pale face, he hurriedly asked, "What happened to Peter? What illness does he have?" Clara Blake pushed him away. "If anything happens to my son, I swear I will never coexist under the same sky with your Fan Tien Palace." She glared at Julian Quinn before turning and running off. Julian Quinn had never imagined that a fleeting spring night would leave him with a son, now 4 years old. Thinking about Peter Blake's appearance filled his heart with warmth, but then remembering Peter's current uncertain fate, his heart tightened further, and an unprecedented sense of anxiety surged within him. Outside Clearwater City, Henry Owen was anxiously waiting, his face full of worry. Amid the swirling red dust in the distance, a majestic horse figure galloped forward. The taut nerves in me finally relaxed a little. "You're here. I just received news that Peter is at the residence of the second prince, Charles Anderson." Henry Owen rushed forward, grabbing the reins of the fine horse Clara Blake was riding. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, as though he had done it 1,000 times before. Gone was the usual noble demeanor. At this moment, he resembled nothing more than a common servant. Chapter 13. The fiery Lady Clara Blake's worried eyes were fixed on Henry Owen's face. "There's no time left, take me to the second prince's residence immediately." "But I don't have a horse right now." Henry Owen hesitated slightly, not because he deliberately avoided riding one, but due to a minor incident. Without saying a word, Clara Blake reached out, grabbed Henry Owen's arm, and pulled him onto the horse. Henry Owen sat behind Clara Blake, his chest pressed against her slender back. The faint scent of lotus from her hair wafted into his nose, making his heart momentarily feel like it was floating in a dream. His hand unconsciously moved to encircle her waist, but just then, Clara Blake lashed the whip against the horse's flank. The horse neighed loudly and galloped away, nearly throwing poor Henry Owen to the ground. The jolt snapped him back to his senses, grateful he hadn't done anything inappropriate, otherwise, who knows how Clara Blake might have misunderstood him. The vast city of Clearwater stretched out before them, with the second prince's residence located at the farthest end of West Street, ironically making it the most distant of all the prince's estates. By the time they arrived at the estate, the sun was setting in the west. The golden hues of twilight bathed the residence in a surreal beauty, both breathtaking and illusory. Seeing Henry Owen, the guards opened the gates without a word, indicating that his relationship with the second prince was anything but ordinary. Clara Blake scoffed coldly. Even if you and Charles Anderson are blood brothers, if he dares to harm a single hair on Peter's head, I will not spare him. Henry Owen wiped the sweat off his brow and quickly replied, "Rest assured, Charles isn't that despicable. He also attended the auction for the white blood herb. When he saw Peter with me and realized we knew each other, he brought the unconscious Peter back to his residence. In a way, he's actually your benefactor." As the two spoke and walked, they reached the main hall, where Charles Anderson was casually sipping tea and chatting with a beautiful young woman. "Charles Anderson, where is my son? Where is he?" Though Clara Blake had never met the man before, she instantly recognized him as the second prince of the Vermilion Empire, Charles Anderson. Charles Anderson looked at the woman who had just barged in. Dressed in pure white, her ethereal beauty was only accentuated by the worry etched on her face, making her even more captivating. This woman seemed vaguely familiar, though he couldn't immediately recall where he had seen her before. "How rude! How dare you address His Highness so casually?" The guard behind Charles Anderson erupted in anger, pointing at Clara Blake with the intention of scolding her further, but Charles Anderson stopped him. "Stand down. Bring the child here immediately." A glimmer of intrigue sparkled in Charles Anderson's eyes. He had encountered countless women, but none had ever dared to show such disrespect toward him. "Miss Blake is desperately searching for her child. I hope your highness can forgive her," Henry Owen interjected. He had witnessed Clara Blake's fierce determination firsthand and knew she was far from the delicate woman she appeared to be. For her son, she would stop at nothing. However, this was no ordinary place. Causing trouble here would lead to unimaginable consequences. Charles Anderson waved his hand dismissively, signaling that it was fine. "The Owens bloodline brother, it seems your relationship with Miss Blake is far from simple." Helen Anderson, who had been silently ignored all this time, could no longer hold back. "Henry Owen, what exactly is your relationship with her?" Helen Anderson was seething with anger. That wretched Henry Owen hadn't even glanced at her since entering, treating her as if she were invisible. Did he truly think she didn't exist? Henry Owen's expression shifted, as if he had only just noticed Helen Anderson's presence. Internally, he groaned, knowing that if he had realized she was here, he wouldn't have dared step foot inside for anything. Seventh princess, it's been a while," Henry Owen stammered with an awkward smile, instinctively stepping back 3 paces to hide behind Charles Anderson. Before the 7th princess could interrogate him further, the guard returned, carrying Peter into the main hall. Clara Blake rushed over to take Peter from him, sweeping the tea set off the table to lay him down carefully. Peter's face was still contorted in pain, drenched in sweat. His breathing was weak, his consciousness unclear, and his eyes rolled back in his head. Hashtag chapter 14, what's wrong with him after all? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Henry Owen paced back and forth, restless like a shuttle. Just yesterday, everything seemed fine, and now things had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Luckily, Physician Lee came to check Seventh Sister's pulse. I asked him to examine Peter's condition as well. Physician Lee said it's a case of blood blockage, caused by absorbing too many toxins while still in the womb. He also mentioned that children with this condition usually don't survive. The fact that he was born and lived this long is truly a miracle, Charles Anderson recounted Physician Lee's words, his gaze filled with curiosity as he looked at Clara Blake. Just what kind of person was this woman? Can it be cured? Henry Owen asked, his heart aching as he looked at Peter Blake's pale little face. Such a lively child, and yet burdened with illness. Charles Anderson sighed and shook his head. Unless you have the blood elixir pill. But such a pill can only be crafted by an 8th-tier alchemist. You know how rare even 6th-tier alchemists are these days, let alone an 8th-tier one. As the two men spoke, they saw Clara Blake place a pill into Peter's mouth, then channel her energy into his body. White energy. The energy emanating from Clara Blake's palm was white. In the Western continent, the color of a cultivator's energy represented their level of cultivation. Energy colors were divided into 9 shades: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, white, and gold, corresponding to the 9 tiers of martial arts cultivation. Above the 9th tier were the 4 realms of heaven, earth, mystical, and mortal, with heaven being the highest and mortal the lowest. Beyond these, there existed the mystical heaven realm. Upon entering the heaven, earth, mystical, and mortal realms, the energy color would become invisible, completely concealed, making it impossible for others to discern. Clara Blake's energy, however, was white, indicating that her current tier was 8th. This woman was truly extraordinary. Even Charles Anderson, long regarded as a genius, was only at the 6th tier. Brother, I keep feeling like this woman looks so familiar, as if I've seen her somewhere before, Helen Anderson said, continuously scrutinizing Clara Blake. Since the first time she laid eyes on Clara Blake, she had this nagging feeling. They must have crossed paths before. Oh? You feel the same way? Charles Anderson looked at Clara Blake with a meaningful gaze. Peter Blake's consciousness gradually became clear. Though still in pain, seeing his mother right before him, he smiled brightly and threw himself into her arms. Mother, you finally came to get me. Peter was so scared. Peter's small head rubbed against Clara Blake's chest. Clara Blake's eyes reddened, filled with heartache. Peter was afraid of the dark. She couldn't imagine what he had endured last night. It was my fault. I shouldn't have left you to chase after the bad guy. I promise I won't do it again. She held Peter Blake tightly, tears streaming down her face. The moment Peter was kidnapped, it felt as if her world was collapsing. She couldn't lose Peter, absolutely not. Mother, I got the white blood herb. Peter lifted his head from Clara Blake's embrace, raised his hand, and a white jade bottle appeared. The faint fragrance of the white blood herb instantly filled the hall. Clara Blake was overjoyed. She had always blamed herself for failing to retrieve the white blood herb and even losing her son. But now, her son had not only returned safely but had also brought back the white blood herb. The white blood herb was a priceless treasure that everyone coveted. Charles Anderson had appeared at Owen Trading's auction house precisely because of it. Clara Blake took the white blood herb and turned to Charles Anderson and Henry Owen. Peter is in critical condition. I must refine the life-sustaining pill for him. Please take care of Peter, and request the second prince to prepare a private chamber for me immediately. Refining pills? She was an alchemist? An alchemist and, at the same time, an 8th grade martial expert? Hashtag chapter 15, who exactly is she? The secret chamber in the prince's residence was readily available. For the request of an alchemist, how could the deep-minded Charles Anderson refuse? The chamber was quickly prepared, and Charles Anderson personally escorted Clara Blake to its entrance. The arrogance he displayed earlier had completely vanished upon learning that she was an alchemist. Clara Blake handed a porcelain bottle to Henry Owen. This is the Ko-Yang pill. Peter must take 1 pill every hour. Until I return, do not stop administering it. Remember. Under the astonished gazes of everyone, she swiftly entered the chamber, shutting the door and isolating herself completely. Ko-Yang pill? A pill worth thousands of gold, and she has an entire bottle of it? Henry Owen looked at the porcelain bottle in his hand in disbelief. The Ko-Yang pill was a 5th grade medicinal pill with significant effects in enhancing cultivation for practitioners. It was also a rare treasure. If auctioned, it could easily fetch a price of tens of thousands of gold, rivaling the value of the white blood herb. Charles Anderson stared at the tightly shut chamber door and suddenly remarked, "What did she say earlier? She wants to refine the life-prolonging pill?" Helen Anderson nodded. "Yes, she said she wants to refine the life-prolonging pill. The life-prolonging pill is a 7th grade medicinal pill. Can she truly succeed on her own?" In her impression, alchemists who reached the 4th grade or higher were always elderly individuals. A high-grade alchemist as young as Clara was unheard of. "Peter, do you usually take these?" Henry Owen shook the porcelain bottle in front of Peter. Peter nodded. "Every time my illness acts up, I have to take them. They don't taste good at all, not even as good as the life-prolonging pill." Peter, sweating profusely from pain, still managed a smile. He couldn't let his mother worry about him. He was a man, he could endure this. Wait, what? Not as good as the life-prolonging pill. Could it be that he had taken the life-prolonging pill before? It was known that the life-prolonging pill, aside from being high-grade, required extremely rare ingredients that were incredibly difficult to gather. Who exactly was Clara Blake? Watching Peter Blake treat the Ko-Yang pill as casually as candy, Henry Owen felt as if his heart was being torn apart, as though Peter were consuming pieces of his own flesh. Inside the chamber, Clara Blake took out her cauldron. The ingredients for refining the life-prolonging pill were complete, but there was only 1 white blood herb. She could only succeed, failure was not an option, as Peter's life depended on it. With a graceful wave of her jade-like hand, a dazzling golden flame ignited within the ancient bronze cauldron. She had never refined pills in front of others, primarily because of the unique flame she used. It was a rare fire she had encountered 3 years ago in the depths of a forest, which took her 3 months to subdue. Using this rare fire to refine medicinal extracts produced purer results and significantly increased the success rate compared to ordinary flames. This type of strange flame is a treasure that all alchemists dream of. She understood the principle of hiding her talents and naturally wouldn't flaunt it in front of others. Moreover, for an alchemist, a strange flame is not only an aid in pill refining but can also be used in martial techniques, significantly enhancing their destructive power. One by one, the medicinal ingredients were placed into the cauldron. Clara Blake skillfully controlled the temperature of the strange flame, continuously extracting the essence of the medicinal ingredients that floated out of the cauldron. "I remember now, no wonder she looked so familiar," Helen Anderson exclaimed, slamming the table and breaking the silence in the room. The second prince frowned, glanced at Helen Anderson, and said discontentedly, "You are a princess, why are you so flustered? Where have all those years of etiquette and upbringing gone?" Helen Anderson waved her hand dismissively, her face indifferent. She was already tired of her second brother's reprimands. "Second brother, do you really not remember Clara Blake?" Charles Anderson looked at Helen Anderson, his expression as if he had just realized something, and shook his head, saying, "I don't remember." "Why? Did I know her before?" Chapter 17, Did you put a green hat on him? Not just a mere acquaintance. She's the daughter of Princess and Ben. Don't you have any recollection? The two of you even had a marriage engagement. The seventh princess exclaimed excitedly, her face full of astonishment. Who would have thought that 5 years after the royal family annulled the engagement, Clara Blake would suddenly appear before them? Charles Anderson's face turned dark. That woman who had once made him a laughingstock. Clara Blake, no wonder she seemed familiar. So, it's true that enemies are bound to meet, their entanglement running deep. Henry Owen was equally surprised. Clara Blake was the only legitimate daughter of the Blake Marquis family, rumored to have passed away long ago. Yet here she was, alive and well, exuding an overwhelming aura and possessing a beauty that could topple kingdoms. Thanks to the pill provided by Yang, Peter's pain had subsided by half. Listening to the adults' conversation, the curious boy asked, "Did you all know my mother before?" Henry Owen coughed awkwardly, glancing at Charles Anderson, whose face was livid, and nodded at Peter Blake. "We've never met her in person, only heard of her reputation." Charles Anderson looked up at the blue sky and white clouds, and the humiliation from 5 years ago came rushing back. He had actually saved the son of his former fiancée and her lover? If word of this got out, how would he ever show his face again? The Owens bloodline uncle, this uncle over here doesn't seem very happy. Does he have some grudge against my mother? Peter Blake, sharp and perceptive, couldn't miss the anger written all over Charles Anderson's face. Henry Owen let out a dry laugh and stepped forward to pat Charles Anderson on the shoulder, speaking in a low voice, "It's all in the past now. Let it go. You've seen Clara Blake's strength for yourself. Don't let a moment of anger ruin things. You should understand the value and power of a high-ranking alchemist." Charles Anderson glared at Henry Owen and retorted angrily, "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who got cuckolded." Although the Vermilion Empire valued martial prowess, it was also a nation with conservative customs, where a woman's reputation was of utmost importance. But Clara Blake, as the daughter of Princess and Ben and the Blake Marquis family, and his fiancée no less, had shamelessly tangled with a man in a temple, became pregnant, and put a glaring green hat on him, a humiliation he could never erase. "Uncle, did your wife make you wear a green hat?" Peter endured the pain as he jumped off the table, walking up to Charles Anderson with a face full of sympathy. His mother once said that no matter how majestic or powerful a man might be, if he's cheated on by a woman, he'll become a laughingstock, a loser in the eyes of the world. So Peter vowed that if he ever got married, he'd make sure to properly teach his wife and never give her a chance to cheat. Charles Anderson's eyebrows twitched as he gritted his teeth and said, "She's not exactly my wife, but we were once engaged." And yet. Before Charles could finish, Peter interrupted with a grin, "Uncle, my mother says women cheat for two reasons. Either they are naturally promiscuous, or their man cannot satisfy them. That's why they seek someone else. Someone as noble as you would never marry a naturally promiscuous woman, right? So, could it be that in some way, you couldn't satisfy her? Is that why she cheated on you?" Peter shook his head vigorously. Although he didn't quite understand what, in some way, meant, his mother had said so, and she also told him he'd understand when he grew up. Charles Anderson's face grew darker and darker. He wanted nothing more than to storm into the secret chamber and demand an explanation from her. What did she mean by, in some way? She hadn't even tried, so how could she know he couldn't satisfy her? And yet she was already craving another man. Henry Owen struggled to suppress his laughter, almost injuring himself in the process. Clara Blake, of all things, why teach a child about this? Hashtag Chapter 18, Anger. The unlucky child Helen Anderson, though unmarried, understood a bit about life. Hearing Peter Blake's long-winded explanation, her face immediately turned beet red. She glared at Peter before covering her face and rushing out of the main hall. The full moon rose high, and Peter's pain grew increasingly unbearable. His small, pale face was devoid of any color, sweat as large as beads rolled down his cheeks, soaking his clothes. His handsome face contorted with agony, yet he bit his lip, refusing to utter a single sound. Henry Owen sat beside him, tightly gripping the boy's small hand. "Peter, if it hurts, cry out. Otherwise, you'll bite through your lip." Peter shook his head. "Mother will worry." "I can't let her worry." Such a simple statement deeply moved the two grown men. Such a young child, yet he endured the pain silently just to avoid worrying his mother. How must his mother feel, seeing her son this way? Both men felt their hearts ache for Peter's resilience, and even more so for Clara Blake, who loved her son more than life itself. As Peter grew weaker, breathing more out than in, unable even to speak, the two men anxiously paced back and forth. Clara Blake had made it clear, if the elixir wasn't ready by dawn, Peter would lose his life. Such a lovable child, why did fate treat him so cruelly? If Peter Blake were to die, what would become of Clara Blake? Henry Owen dared not imagine it, his heart clenched as he silently prayed countless times to Buddha. Before dawn, the tightly shut door of the secret chamber finally opened. A strong medicinal aroma wafted out, permeating every corner of the Crown Prince's residence. She rushed into the main hall, where Peter was so weak he was barely breathing. She pushed Henry Owen aside, trembling as she placed a fiery red pill into Peter's mouth, channeling her energy to help the medicine flow into his stomach. She desperately rubbed Peter's icy hands, muttering repeatedly, "It'll be okay, everything will be okay." As morning broke, Charles Anderson immediately sent someone to summon Dr. Lee. When Dr. Lee arrived, he saw Clara Blake clutching Peter Blake tightly, her eyes vacant and lifeless. Observing Peter Blake in her arms, he noticed the boy's face was as pale as a sheet, his pulse had stopped, and his chest no longer rose or fell, he was clearly dead. Seeing Dr. Lee shake his head and sigh, Henry Owen's heart wrenched. He lunged forward, grabbing Dr. Lee's arm and shouting, "Didn't you claim to bring the dead back to life? Save him." Dr. Lee sighed again. I am but a physician, not a deity. How could I possess the divine power to resurrect the dead? Such a pity, so young, and yet. Shut up, get out, all of you, get out, don't disturb Peter's rest, all of you, get out. Clara Blake roared angrily, waving her hand as a surge of white energy burst forth, pushing everyone out of the main hall. Dr. Lee sighed deeply, turned around, and left. He had spent his entire life practicing medicine, witnessing countless separations of life and death, seeing the old bid farewell to the young. How could such moments ever be few? Clara Blake held Peter Blake in her arms, staying awake for 3 days and 3 nights without eating, drinking, or even changing her posture. Charles Anderson couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. So stubborn, just like mother and son alike. At that moment, he seemed to catch a glimpse of a small, soft hand hanging limply, with its fingers twitching slightly. Thinking he was imagining it, he rubbed his eyes and looked again. Those chubby little fingers had moved. He was stunned. My God, the boy isn't dead, the boy is still alive. He rushed into the main hall, shouting to Clara Blake, Peter isn't dead, the boy isn't dead. I just saw his fingers move. Clara Blake, momentarily dazed, lifted her head to stare intently at Charles Anderson's excited face, and irritably responded. #### Chapter 18, If you die, he still won't, of course, Peter isn't dead. Even if you die, he won't. Looking at Clara Blake's calm expression, it was obvious she already knew Peter wasn't gone. Yet, she clung to him like that, motionless as a statue for 3 whole days and nights. I even thought she had gone mad from the shock of her son's death. Noticing Charles Anderson's confusion, Clara Blake casually explained, the life-extending pill has incredibly potent properties. It can temporarily suppress the toxins in Peter's body. It's like a life-or-death battle. If the pill wins, Peter will survive. If it loses, Peter will definitely go. During this time, Peter absolutely cannot be moved, or it will disrupt his energy flow. Clearly, the life-extending pill had won. That explained why Clara Blake had remained steadfast for 3 days and nights without moving. Can we move now? Charles Anderson asked, noticing Peter Blake's face gradually regaining its color. Clara Blake pouted. 3 days and nights of enduring had worn her out, but her beauty remained impeccable, perhaps even more delicate, evoking a sense of compassion. I'd love to get moving, but my legs are completely numb. What can I do? 3 days and nights without moving, of course, she'd feel numb. Charles Anderson looked at her, then suddenly bent down and scooped Clara Blake into his arms. Carefully, he also held Peter Blake, who was still cradled in her embrace, and turned to head toward the study behind the main hall. Clara Blake didn't resist. She gazed up at the man in front of her, handsome, strong, exuding a regal aura, just as she remembered. In truth, she had recognized him back at the Treasure Pavilion. Charles Anderson, seated in the VIP room next door, was none other than Clara Blake's former fiancé. In her memory, Charles Anderson had always been indifferent to her. Though they hadn't interacted much, he never once looked her in the eye. He even secretly complained to the Empress, bluntly stating he didn't want to marry into a Marquis that was in decline. Looking at Charles Anderson's handsome face, her mind naturally conjured the image of Julian Quinn. Though he wore a mask, she still felt that behind it must lie an extraordinary visage. She shook her head. Why was she thinking about him? She had never even seen his face. Charles Anderson gently laid Clara Blake down on the bed in the study, then called in 2 maids and instructed them to massage her legs. "Thank you, Your Highness. I will surely repay your kindness one day," she said, nodding at Charles Anderson. Toward him, she felt neither much affection nor any particular dislike. "Where is Henry Owen?" she asked, glancing around, but not seeing Henry Owen anywhere. She found it strange. Over the past 3 days, though she had neither moved nor spoken with anyone, she knew Henry Owen had always been keeping watch outside. "Miss Blake, there's no need to be so formal. Henry Owen is likely at the 4th Prince's residence right now," Charles Anderson replied nonchalantly, his lips tightening into a faint smile, both smug and mocking. Clara Blake didn't miss the trace of mockery in his smile. She knew he must have discovered her true identity, so she spoke frankly. "Did he go to see my maternal grandfather?" Her mother was the legitimate daughter of the 4th Prince of the Vermilion Empire, Princess Ping, making the 4th Prince her maternal grandfather. She still remembered the past vividly. Years ago, Clara Blake had been caught in a compromising situation at a temple, the air thick with the scent of scandal. Even a fool could guess what had happened. Her father, the Marquis of the Blake family, had been enraged and wanted to petition the emperor for her execution as an unfilial daughter. If it hadn't been for her grandmother and maternal grandfather's unwavering protection, she wouldn't have survived to leave Qingyang City, let alone become the Clara Blake of today. The Owens bloodline feared you might lose your mind over Peter and felt it inappropriate to ask your father-in-law for help, so he went to the 4th Prince's residence, Charles Anderson explained. Clara Blake shrugged indifferently. Her impression of her maternal grandfather was still quite positive. He was kind and compassionate, always treating her warmly. Now that she had returned to Qingyang City, she had no intention of leaving so hastily. She also recalled that when she was a child, her nanny had told her that when her mother married into the Marquis household, her dowry had been extraordinarily lavish, so much so that it was said to be 10 miles of red dowry. However, her mother had only lived in the Marquis household for a year before tragically passing away. That dowry, by rights, should have been left to her. Chapter 19, reclaiming what belongs to me. Now that she had returned, she must reclaim what was rightfully hers. Not long after, the 4th Prince hurried to the prince's residence, his stern face shadowed with sorrow. As he was led into the study, his gaze immediately fell upon Clara Blake, seated on the chaise. It had been years since they last met. Her once youthful face had now fully matured, bearing an uncanny resemblance to her late mother. "My child." The 4th Prince, known for his stoic demeanor and aversion to frivolity, had not shed a single tear even when his first wife passed. Yet at this moment, upon seeing Clara Blake, his eyes grew moist. "Grandfather," Clara Blake gently placed Peter down and quickly stepped off the chaise to bow respectfully. The 4th Prince hurriedly moved forward to support her. "My child, you've suffered so much. Peter, don't grieve. With me here, you'll stay at the prince's residence from now on. I will protect you, no one will dare harm you." Clara Blake felt a sting in her nose as emotions swelled. After 5 years in this world, this was the first time she truly felt familial warmth. "Thank you, grandfather. Peter isn't gone, he will live a long life, just like you." Clara Blake looked at the elderly man before her, warmth spreading in her heart. The 4th Prince was overjoyed. His great-grandchild wasn't dead? He quickly turned his gaze to the chaise, where a delicate child lay sleeping peacefully. Though the child's complexion was a bit pale, his breathing was steady. Unable to resist, the fourth prince stepped closer to observe the child carefully. Though the prince's residence was filled with offspring and grandchildren, he had never seen one as endearing as this little one. If not for the child's sound sleep, he would have already scooped him up for a cuddle. "Come, bring my great-grandchild. We're going back to the prince's residence." The fourth prince turned to take Clara Blake's hand, looking directly at the young woman before him. Her face, so much like her late mother's, stirred old memories. He still remembered how young Clara Blake used to cling to him affectionately. Among all his grandchildren, only Clara had ever held a special place in his heart. Clara Blake hesitated, glancing at the elderly man. "Grandfather, I want to return to Blake Estate." The fourth prince froze. "What? You want to return to Blake Estate? Do you know what's there?" Clara Blake interrupted him, raising her voice. "I must return to Blake Estate to reclaim what is mine." Her determination brought tears to the fourth prince's eyes. This child's temperament mirrored that of his late wife, stubborn and resolute. Years ago, when Linda married into Blake Estate, her mother had prepared an exceptionally lavish dowry. The prince's residence treasury was nearly halved to accommodate it. Combined with the dowry from his late wife, it was a fortune worthy of the grandest celebrations. Linda carried this vast wealth into Blake Estate, only to fall ill and pass away within a year, leaving behind a month-old child. According to the laws of Vermilion, a woman's dowry should be entirely inherited by her children. If she has no children, it can be reclaimed entirely by her natal family. At that time, the royal family presented a detailed list of Linda's dowry when she married into the Blake Estate. This included cash, jewelry, antiques, promissory notes, farmland, estates, houses, and even dozens of dowry maids, wet nurses, and more. The royal family demanded that William seal everything and save it for Clara Blake to use as her dowry when she got married in the future. William, fearing that the fourth prince would take the dowry back to the royal estate, immediately agreed to the conditions and even formalized them in writing. However, when Clara Blake was 14, an incident occurred at the temple, followed by her disappearance during pregnancy. With Clara Blake's life or death uncertain and her reputation ruined, the fourth prince lost face and never came to the Blake estate to claim the dowry. The matter was thus left unresolved and unmentioned. "Grandfather, rest assured, Clara will reclaim everything Mother left behind there. That is the dowry you left for Clara. How could I let anyone else take advantage of it?" Chapter 20, The Power to Protect Oneself. Clara Blake smiled at her grandfather, determination clearly written on her beautiful face. But the fourth prince still looked worried. Clara, a fragile young woman, how could she stand up against the ferocious women in the back courtyard of Blake Estate, a place full of cunning and ruthless individuals? Clara Blake raised her hand, a milky white aura swirling gently in her palm. "Grandfather, rest assured. I have the ability to protect myself and will not let anyone harm me or Peter." A white aura? 8th rank? The fourth prince was astonished, then overjoyed. The once delicate girl had grown up. Over the years, she must have encountered extraordinary opportunities to achieve such accomplishments. After all, he himself was the fourth prince and had been practicing martial arts for decades, yet he had only reached the 6th rank. And in the Vermilion Empire, even a 6th rank was considered a master. However, would the Blake estate accept Clara now? Having a child out of wedlock was a taboo in the Vermilion Empire. While there were no laws against it, public scorn alone could ruin someone. Clara Blake understood her grandfather's concerns and said, "Grandfather, don't worry. Just take me back to Blake Estate and tell William Blake that if they refuse to keep me, then my marriage will be entirely handled by you. Also, demand that he return my entire dowry." The fourth prince nodded. Clara was right. From what he knew of William Blake, there was no way he would return the dowry to the royal family. The Blake estate was already struggling, with few competent individuals left. They lived extravagantly, with countless concubines in the household and a horde of children. Their finances had long been stretched thin. If they had to return Linda's dowry, the Blake estate would likely face bankruptcy. Using this as leverage, the fourth prince was confident he could keep Clara there. But what about Clara's future? "Grandfather, don't worry. I've been through a lot over the years. I'm no longer the Clara of the past. A small estate like Blake Estate is nothing to me." A cold glint flashed across Clara Blake's beautiful face. Every time she thought of Charles Anderson's words, that Peter's illness was due to absorbing too many toxins while in her womb, she felt an uncontrollable fury and a strong desire to crush the bones of the one who poisoned her. She didn't care about the dowry itself. She was now incredibly wealthy, far beyond anything the Blake estate could ever dream of. 10 Blake estates combined wouldn't match her assets. However, she couldn't bear to let those vile people squander her mother's belongings. Why should they get to enjoy what her mother left behind? The fourth prince, unable to sway Clara Blake's resolve, had no choice but to follow her wishes. He immediately sent an invitation to William Blake, informing him that Clara Blake would be returning to Blake Estate in 3 days and instructing him to prepare accommodations in advance. "Clara, when you face challenges, consult your grandmother and don't act recklessly. Although your martial skills are impressive, you can't rely solely on your temper. Remember, the foundation of living in this world isn't just about having strong fists." The fourth prince gave careful instructions, truly reluctant to let her leave like this. Clara Blake nodded repeatedly. "Don't worry, for Peter's future, I will certainly not act recklessly. Grandfather, Peter will visit you often." Peter hugged the fourth prince's leg, looking up sweetly. The corners of the fourth prince's eyes grew moist again. This child, so intelligent and adorable, but why must he suffer from this illness? Clara Blake handed a prescription to the fourth prince. "Grandfather, these medicinal ingredients are priceless treasures. I am still searching for them. With your vast connections, please help me find them when you have time. Regardless of the cost, I can afford it. I ask for your help, Grandfather." The fourth prince understood that this prescription was surely a remedy to save his great-grandson's life. He carefully tucked it into his chest and agreed immediately. The carriage gradually disappeared into the distance. The fourth prince stood silently at the door for a long time, staring after the carriage that had long vanished, his aged face filled with sorrow. "So, what does the Marquis residence look like? Is it bigger than my grandfather's royal residence?" Chapter 21, "Oh dear, those gossiping ladies are too much." Peter blinked his sparkling eyes, curious as ever, and asked. Clara Blake tried to dig through her memory. What did the Blake estate look like again? The Duke's manor and the Blake estate weren't far apart, just about the time it took to burn a stick of incense. Soon enough, the carriage stopped in front of the Blake estate's gates. Mother and daughter stepped down from the carriage, taking in the view of the Blake estate before them. The crimson gates towered high, flanked by 2 majestic stone lions. The green stone steps were intricately carved with exquisite reliefs. Everywhere you looked, the place exuded an air of unmatched luxury. After racking her brain for a while, Clara Blake finally recalled the old appearance of the Blake estate. It seemed a bit different from how it looked now. Could it be that during the years she was away, they had spruced up the entire estate? Clara Blake smirked. They could renovate all they wanted, as long as they didn't spend her money. The crimson gates remained tightly shut, with no one coming out to greet them. As soon as mother and daughter stepped down from the carriage, a crowd of passers-by gathered around, eager to gossip. Their words were sharp, full of insinuations about virtue and womanly conduct, accusing Clara Blake of being shameless and tarnishing the family's reputation. At first, the insults were mild, but they soon escalated, turning into a cacophony of market-like jeers, as if they were afraid the whole world wouldn't hear them. Clara Blake glanced at the crowd, her mind as clear as a mirror. These people, seeing her step down from the carriage and immediately swarming around, had clearly been waiting in advance. Knowing she was returning today, it couldn't have been anyone else but her grandfather's people, Charles Anderson, Henry Owen, and the rest of the Blake estate's inhabitants. Clearly, Charles Anderson and Henry Owen had no reason to do such a thing. "Mom, are these gossiping ladies insulting someone?" Peter Blake looked at the distorted faces of the adults, his delicate brows furrowed tightly. Clara Blake gently patted her son's head and softly replied, "Yes, they are insulting someone." Peter noticed his mother secretly winking at him and immediately understood. His small hand raised, and a flash of light emerged from his spatial ring. A handkerchief appeared in Peter's hand. Holding one corner, he waved it gently, releasing a strange fragrance that wafted through the air and into the noses of everyone present. "Oh dear, Peter, what are you holding? That's not a handkerchief laced with bone-eating powder, is it? Why did you take it out? If people smell that powder, it'll cause big trouble." Clara Blake subtly glanced at Peter with approval, then pretended to cry out in alarm. Peter blinked his mischievous round eyes and chimed in, "It's just a handkerchief, Mom, you're overreacting." Clara Blake said, "This isn't an ordinary handkerchief. It's dusted with bone-eating powder. This powder is highly toxic, it makes people itch down to their bones. Even if they scratch until their skin peels off, the itching won't stop, and eventually, their whole body will fester and die." As Clara finished speaking, the crowd surrounding her suddenly began scratching themselves, their faces filled with terror. If what Clara said was true, it was as if she had just pronounced their death sentence. In no time, the once chatty group scattered in disarray. The unbearable itching, coupled with the fear of their bodies festering as Clara described, was too much to handle. Clara Blake raised a pale blue porcelain vial and calmly said, "This is the antidote. Whoever tells the truth will get it." I'll talk. It was Lady Yang from the Marquis Manor who ordered us to do this." Yes, she forced us." "Miss, please spare us, we beg for your mercy." Clara Blake's eyes gleamed as she softly said, "I am the daughter of the Marquis Manor, and she is just a concubine of the manor. Logically, we are family. Why would she do such a thing? Are you telling the truth?" A woman in her 30s, unable to endure the torment of the itching any longer, suddenly knelt before Clara Blake with a loud thud and cried out, "We've told you everything. Lady Yang wanted to tarnish your reputation so you wouldn't be able to marry. We don't know her exact reasons, but please, miss, have mercy on us." Hashtag Chapter 22, Chaos. Bring it on, who's afraid? Peter furrowed his delicate brows and pouted, "Mother, who is concubine Yang? Why does she want to tarnish your reputation? What does she gain from it?" The 4-year-old boy genuinely didn't understand. Concubine Yang and his mother had no grievances or enmity, so why would she want to harm her? Clara Blake didn't answer Peter's question. Instead, she turned her head to look at the group of people kneeling on the ground and said indifferently, "Get out of my sight. Before you dare to wrong Clara Blake, make sure to wash your necks clean. Now, scram." With that, she threw the jade bottle to the ground. The bottle shattered into pieces, releasing a faint fragrance into the air. The itching on everyone's bodies immediately disappeared, and they fled in panic. In the mansion, the old madam of the Marquis household sat with a cold expression, staring at her son. One wanted to bring the granddaughter back, while the other didn't want to see his daughter ever again. Standing beside them was concubine Yang, dressed in a willow green long dress with a silk belt cinched at her waist. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, adorned with a jade hairpin. Her black hair was as glossy as clouds, and the jade pin accentuated her delicate, youthful face. Despite being 30 years old, she was still as beautiful as a maiden in her 20s. She glanced sideways at the angry William Blake and chuckled softly, "My lord, why are you upset with the old madam? She only cares for her grandchild. Acting this way will make others think you're cold-hearted and unfeeling." William Blake grew even more irritated upon hearing this. The old madam wasn't his biological mother, merely a stepmother in name. Over the years, he had tolerated her condescending attitude toward him, but now she wanted to meddle in his children's affairs too? And still put on a facade of kindness? Disgusting. The more William Blake thought about it, the angrier he became. He stood up abruptly and said coldly, "There's no need to discuss this further. If she wants to return, I won't stop her. Whatever you want to do, I don't care. Just pretend I don't exist." With that, he stormed off in anger. A triumphant smile appeared on concubine Yang's lips. She bowed to the old madam and then followed after William Blake. Wang Mama hurriedly brought over a cup of hot tea, her face filled with worry. But when she saw the old madam smiling, she was puzzled. Could it be that she was too angry to react? Seeing Wang Mama's confusion, the old madam patted her hand and said with a smile, "Do you think I'm angry?" Wang Mama didn't understand, and the old madam leaned back against her cushion, saying, "In all these years, have you ever truly seen me angry?" Wang Mama thought about it and realized she hadn't. The old madam had only occasionally been provoked by that conniving concubine Yang. "Please enlighten me, old madam," Wang Mama said earnestly. If the old madam didn't explain, she feared she would never understand. The old madam knew Wang Mama's honest and straightforward nature. She wasn't one for many words. In the past, the old madam hadn't confided in her, fearing she might be deceived by some fox-like woman. But now that the situation was settled, there was no harm in telling her. Back then, when I shamelessly begged for a marriage alliance with the fourth prince's household, I had already made up my mind. I would endure everything for the sake of the Blake family's future and glory. If William Blake showed even a shred of filial piety, I would spend my later years peacefully in this mansion, turning a blind eye to everything. Chapter 23. Finally, the day has come. The old madam's face was filled with sorrow. Linda was a good child, but her fate was unfortunate. Meeting me ruined her lifelong happiness, not to mention it cost her life. Madame Wang grew even more indignant. Has the Lord ever thought about who helped him secure the Marquis title? Without the old madam, he would have remained a mere concubine-born son. What right would he have had to inherit the Marquis title? Without the old madam arranging this marriage, where would his wealth and glory come from? Without the fourth prince's backing, all the trouble he's caused over the years would have been enough to strip him of his title, or worse. And yet, he resents the old madam? The old madam snorted coldly. After Linda died, for the sake of the Marquis household's reputation, I pretended not to know and told the prince she died of illness. Who would have thought they'd turn their schemes on Clara? Despite my countless efforts to protect her, they still managed to slip through. Clara's life was ruined, and that's partly my fault. Madame Wang, equally grief-stricken, felt her heart ache. The eldest young lady was raised by her, and yet such a tragedy befell her. The old madam herself fell gravely ill over this matter, nearly losing her life. She was in a coma for months but thankfully woke in time to save the young lady. However, who could have anticipated the carriage escorting the young lady out of the city would meet with an accident? Witnesses claimed to have seen the young lady fall down a slope. At the time, she was pregnant. Though the slope wasn't high, it was enough to take her life. The old madam and the fourth prince sent many people to search for her. Apart from a bloodstain at the foot of the slope, there was no other trace. Some said the young lady had been dragged away by wild beasts, but the old madam refused to believe it. She was adamant that the young lady was still alive and would one day return. Finally, they had waited long enough for that day to come. Let's not talk about this anymore. Go out to welcome them, they should be arriving soon. The old madam's wrinkled eyes finally softened. Her Clara had finally returned. From now on, she would live only for Clara. Whatever Clara wanted, she would make it happen. Even if it meant taking William Blake's life, she wouldn't hesitate. If she had once helped him inherit the title, she could now overthrow him and find someone else to succeed. Although Blake estate had no legitimate heirs, there were plenty of concubine-born sons. Madame Wang, accompanied by the servants of Anshou Hall, went to the estate gates. The grand, gilded doors slowly opened, revealing a young woman in a white dress holding the hand of an adorable little boy. Madame Wang's eyes reddened as soon as she saw Clara Blake. This child, whom she had once cradled and raised, must have endured countless hardships over the years outside. Clara Blake smiled at Madame Wang and greeted her. "Madame Wang, how is grandmother?" Madame Wang quietly wiped her tears, stepped forward to hold Clara Blake's hand, and looked her over from head to toe. Seeing her rosy complexion and smooth skin, she was relieved that Clara didn't appear to have suffered much. "The old madam is in good health, but she talks about you every day. She's lost her appetite and can't sleep well, growing thinner as a result. Now that you're back, the old madam is overjoyed. She even ate a full bowl of rice at lunch today and said she plans to live to 180 years old to see the young master grow up and get married," Madame Wang said cheerfully. Clara Blake understood the underlying meaning in Madame Wang's words but said nothing more. Holding Madame Wang's hand in one of hers and Peter's hand in the other, she walked into Blake estate, surrounded by the servants. Peter curiously observed Blake estate, frowning again and again before finally speaking up. "Mother, this Blake estate doesn't seem as grand as great-grandfather's residence. Why does everyone here act so haughty? Does the Marquis of Blake hold a higher rank than great-grandfather?" Chapter 24, The Shameless Pair. Madame Wang, hearing this, hurriedly gestured for Peter to keep completely silent, signaling him not to babble recklessly. "Young master, don't go spouting nonsense. If these words reach the master's ears, there will surely be a big commotion." Clara Blake retorted, commotion? Let it be, who's afraid of who? If he doesn't make a fuss, I'll make sure to stir things up myself. I came back to Blake Estate to settle scores. Anyone who mistreated me, secretly harmed me, or coveted what belonged to me and my mother, every single one will be exposed for all to see. Her stunning phoenix-like eyes swept over the servants who were sneaking glances at her, a bunch of dog eyes, clearly showing no respect for her. She had no intention of warming cold hearts with her sincerity upon her return. Did they think she was still the naive girl she once was? The sneaky dog eyes immediately dispersed and rushed to report Clara Blake's words to their respective masters. Naturally, among them were spies sent by William Blake and concubine Duong. When the report reached him, William Blake was so enraged that he overturned the table. The fine porcelain tea set shattered into pieces, and the intricately carved rosewood furniture was destroyed under the force of his palm. At that moment, concubine Duong swayed her snake-like figure as she approached, her soft, delicate hand gently stroking William Blake's chest. Master, why must you be angry with a mere girl? Even if she is unfilial, she is still your daughter. So what if she has the old madam and the fourth prince supporting her? She is your flesh and blood, after all. Big or small matters, don't they all follow your arrangements? She blinked flirtatiously, continuing to speak to William Blake. Now she's a wreck, dragging along a child with her. Marrying her off is impossible. Tell me, who in Qingyang City doesn't know about her disgraceful past? Keeping her for life wouldn't be a big deal for you, would it? A cold glint flashed in concubine Yang's eyes. A lifetime, whether it's long or short, depends on fate. William Blake was no fool, how could he not understand the implications in concubine Yang's words? He knew perfectly well how Clara Blake's mother had died, the state of Clara Blake's body, how the carriage carrying Clara Blake had tumbled down the mountain, every detail was as clear as daylight to him. His chest, heaving violently, gradually calmed down. Tai Van was right, her return would only mean one more mouth to feed. As long as she wasn't allowed to marry, nothing would change. His tightly pressed lips finally relaxed into a faint smile. He reached out to take the small, restless hand and gently pulled her into his embrace. His large hands roamed, teasing her until the person in his arms panted heavily, tugging repeatedly at his clothes. The two indulged shamelessly, ignoring the maids and attendants in the hall. Unabashedly enacting their spring scene. Just as the two were entwined and drenched in sweat, little Peter Blake took advantage of everyone's diverted attention and strutted into the hall where the spring scene was unfolding. Peter Blake blinked his bright, gem-like eyes, observing the two bare bodies with a contemplative expression. The two remained completely unaware, lost in their sea of lust. Mother said that if a man's little bird is small, he's not a real man. Peter stroked his chin, looking at concubine Duong with an expression holding 3 parts pity, then said, "Your act doesn't compare to Perry at Zhuanhu Pavilion. Clearly uncomfortable, yet you pretend to enjoy it. Such a shame your skills are still lacking. Miss Feng Tian has already turned over a new leaf. Should I invite her to teach you a thing or two?" Chapter 25, Sarcasm and Relentless Rebuke. The two figures, stark naked, a young man and woman, froze as if turned to stone. When had this brat snuck in? How long had he been watching? And what did his words mean? William Blake's little fellow immediately wilted. He glanced at his little bird, then at concubine Duong's bewildered face, his own expression turning as dark as the bottom of a pot. Concubine Duong hurriedly got up to dress, her mouth babbling incessantly, "My lord, don't listen to his nonsense. You're the best, the man among men." I was in ecstasy, not faking it at all. Hearing this, William Blake's mood eased somewhat, and his expression lightened a little. Peter curled his lips, sneering, "Seems like this lady here has seen quite a few birds before, hasn't she? Otherwise, how could she compare?" William Blake, who had just raised his hand, froze mid-air, his face darkening once more. He glared at Peter Blake and barked, "You wild brat, do you even know where you are?" Judging by the boy's attire, though he had a noble air, his rough clothes resembled those of commoners, he must have been some servant's child sneaking into the manor. Peter Blake nodded enthusiastically, "Of course I know. My mother said this place will be my home in the future. There's no part of the estate I'm not allowed to go." Concubine Duong, finely dressed, glared at Peter Blake. This brat with his shameless talk had clearly come to disrupt her relationship with the master. Could it be that some other concubine sent this little spy here? Her slender, bamboo shoot-like finger pointed directly at Peter as she scolded, "Who are you? Who brought you into the manor? Speak now, or I won't let you off." She was used to acting arrogantly in the estate, especially with William Blake doting on her more and more. With the role of the main wife still vacant, she had started to see herself as the mistress of the house. No one reminded her otherwise, and she herself seemed to have forgotten her true station. "Here you are." From the wide-open main door, a woman in flowing white attire stepped in gracefully. Her stunningly beautiful face bore a faint smile as she glanced at Madame Yang, silently praising her. This woman seemed to have been overly favored by time, though her face was over 30, it bore no traces of age. Instead, it exuded the allure of a mature woman, with a full bosom and a slender waist like a water snake. "Father, after visiting grandmother, I hurried to see you." Unexpectedly, Peter was mischievous and ran ahead of me. "If there's been any discourtesy, I beg your forgiveness." She slightly bowed with respect to William Blake, her demeanor reverent, as if the words the servants had just conveyed hadn't come from her at all. William Blake coldly assessed Clara Blake, slowly buttoning his coat as he pondered how to discipline this audacious girl. Clearly, Yang Taiyun was far less composed than William Blake. Before he could think of how to handle Clara Blake, she hastily spoke up, "Clara, how do you raise your child? No sense of propriety at all, does he think he can go anywhere he pleases?" Thinking about her intimate moment with the master being interrupted by a child, her heart burned with discomfort. Clara Blake raised her head, smiling gently at Yang Taiyun. Her red lips parted slightly. "Does Madame Yang intend to teach me about propriety? Then please enlighten me, how is it that even a concubine can wander freely, but the true mistress is not allowed to set foot here? Is there such a principle in this world?" "Concubine?" Yang Taiyun gasped, drawing a sharp breath. Having lived in the Blake estate for over 10 years, no one had ever dared to call her a concubine to her face. Even the old madam at Ansho Hall had never humiliated her so. Her face turned beet red with anger, far more infuriated than when caught in an intimate act. What did you just say?" Her slender finger pointed straight at Clara Blake, trembling uncontrollably. Clara Blake raised an eyebrow at her trembling finger and nonchalantly replied, "What's the matter? Didn't hear me clearly? Should I have my son repeat it for you?" Clara Blake winked at Peter, who immediately understood and shook his head vigorously. "My mother just said you're a concubine." "I don't know what a concubine is, but since it has the word lowly in it, it can't be anything good." My mother and I are the true masters of this household. If a concubine can come here, why can't the true masters? Mother, am I right? Peter grinned sweetly, as if he weren't just insulting someone but reciting poetry, awaiting his mother's praise. Clara Blake nodded approvingly, reaching out to stroke Peter's head with a smile. Yes, Peter is absolutely right. Later, I'll explain to you what a concubine is. Watching the mother and son act in unison, Madame Yang was so furious she nearly fainted. Luckily, William Blake was there to catch her in time. Taking advantage of the opportunity, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing pitifully, putting on her most sorrowful act to gain his sympathy. Over the past decade, she had used this tactic countless times, always with success. Whenever she played this card, William Blake would inevitably grant her every request. William Blake truly had feelings for concubine Yang, otherwise, how could he let a mere concubine manage the entire household of the Marquis residence? Years ago, William Blake married Linda Anderson, the legitimate daughter of the fourth prince. Though Linda Anderson was beautiful, she lacked charm and was always rigidly proper, exuding an unapproachable air of nobility. Moreover, William Blake, being a second son with a less distinguished background compared to Linda Anderson, often felt inferior in her presence, especially when faced with her untouchable demeanor. Not long after their marriage, Linda Anderson became pregnant and subsequently refused intimacy with William Blake. At the peak of his youth and vitality, William Blake struggled to endure the loneliness of a cold bed. Chapter 26, Why Would I Not Dare to Return? Concubine Yang was originally a dowry maid who had grown up alongside Linda Anderson. Linda treated her well, and while the maid was not as elegant or refined as Linda, her eyes sparkled like spring water, making her stand out among the other servants. Yet, human greed knows no bounds. Despite Linda Anderson's kindness, the maid could not suppress her ambition. One late night, under the guise of delivering tea, she climbed into William Blake's bed. With her beauty and sweet, persuasive words, she quickly won his favor. Ignoring the objections of the old matron, William Blake took her as a concubine and soon elevated her to the status of a secondary wife. "Shut your mouth, you shameless thing!" William Blake openly defended concubine Yang. His gaze was full of affection when he looked at her, but when he turned to Clara Blake, his expression was one of disdain. That face, so much like his late wife's, was one he loathed to see. Shameless? Father, are you discussing shamelessness with your daughter? Clara Blake smiled radiantly, her eyes casually glancing at William Blake's disheveled clothing. If shamelessness were the topic, then the two people before her, engaging in such behavior in the main hall in front of so many servants, surely had no sense of shame themselves. William Blake, flustered by her sharp gaze, turned red with embarrassment and barked, "You've seen me, now leave." Clara Blake curtsied to him, her eyes cold. A pair of shameless adulterers, a despicable couple. She led Peter Blake out of the main hall. They hadn't gone far before they heard concubine Yang's sobs, accompanied by her coquettish whining and William Blake's attempts to comfort her. "Mother, I don't like them." "They don't like us either," Peter Blake said sadly. Although William Blake was his grandfather, he wouldn't even spare Peter a glance, treating him completely differently than the way his maternal great-grandfather did. Clara Blake smiled and said, "Silly child, if you don't like them, then let it be. Why feel sad? They're not worth your sorrow, understand?" To mother and son, spiritually connected, with just one sentence from Clara Blake, Peter immediately understood, his gloomy mood instantly dissipated. He had thought his mother would force him to curry favor with his grandfather, but it seemed he had misunderstood. Madame Wong returned to report to Lady Blake, detailing the first encounter between Clara Blake and William Blake. Lady Blake was both furious and amused, furious at William Blake, a Marquis, for shamelessly behaving so indecently in the main hall, utterly losing face, yet, hearing Clara Blake's response, she was overjoyed. This young girl, after years of absence, seemed to have matured, no longer the little girl who used to hide behind her. Clara Blake was introducing Peter to the surroundings of Blake Estate when a flash of red suddenly appeared, blocking the path of the mother and son. The person wore a long peach-colored dress, a jade pendant at her waist, embroidered shoes, and her hair adorned with a swaying jade hairpin, a typical appearance of a wealthy young lady. Clara Blake recognized her. In her memory, this person held a significant presence. Amelia Blake, the most favored daughter of concubine Yang in Blake Estate, 3 years younger than Clara Blake and just turned 16. Though younger, Amelia Blake had caused her no small amount of trouble in the past. "So it's you. You dare to return?" Amelia Blake sneered at Clara Blake, who was dressed in plain coarse fabric, with only a simple jade hairpin in her hair, lacking any grandeur of a Marquis' daughter. What irritated Amelia the most was that, despite this, Clara's beauty remained undiminished. Even in plain clothes, she exuded an innate noble aura. "This is my home. Why wouldn't I dare to return?" Clara Blake looked at Amelia Blake, the once little girl now grown into a beautiful young lady. However, despite her beauty, she was still the daughter of a concubine, raised by a concubine, and from head to toe, radiated a petty demeanor. Amelia Blake scoffed coldly, casting a disdainful glance at Peter Blake, and mocked, "After causing such disgrace, you still dare to return? Haven't you already brought enough shame to the Marquis' household?" "Humph! If you hadn't escaped quickly 5 years ago, the pig cage in the river would have been your resting place." Pig cage? Clara Blake's forgotten memories were ripped open once again. That night, 5 years ago, after obtaining William Blake's approval, concubine Yang secretly summoned the elders of the Blake bloodline, intending to drown Clara Blake in a pig cage. Fortunately, Lady Blake swiftly received the news and immediately sent people to take Clara away, leading to the carriage accident where the real Clara Blake lost her life, and the reborn Clara Blake took her place. "Dear sister, you're 16 now, aren't you? I heard you're still unmarried." "Well, that's understandable. A concubine's daughter, what respectable family would want to marry you? After all, people value one of two things, either wealth or status. A concubine's daughter without a main wife's backing surely wouldn't have a generous dowry. As for personal qualities, ha 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 ha," Clara Blake's every word struck directly at Amelia Blake's pain. From a young age, Amelia had been pampered, loved by her father and mother, and held great prestige within the Marquis residence. Unfortunately, her status was confined to the Marquis residence. Outside of it, she was merely a concubine's daughter, born of a concubine, lacking a royal maternal family like Clara Blake, and without the protection of the Blake family's matriarch. Respectable families looked down on her, while smaller families didn't meet her standards. What was she to do, become someone's concubine? Her pickiness over the past 2 years had led to this situation. If a few more years passed, she'd be labeled as an old maid, with no one willing to ask for her hand. Grinding her teeth, Amelia Blake retorted, "So what if I'm a concubine's daughter? At least I'm better than you, a woman infamous throughout the land. I am a pure maiden who can't find a husband." Do you really think a worn-out shoe like you, dragging along an illegitimate child, could ever get married? Mother, was the woman just now in the main hall stripping and embracing Grandpa her mother? They look so much alike. A mischievous glint flashed in the eyes of the boy with peach blossom-like features. This vile woman dared to bully his mother. Clara Blake stifled her laughter and loudly replied, "That's right. Her mother is quite something, not only sneaking into men's beds at midnight but also stripping in front of everyone." Amelia Blake's beautiful face immediately turned pale. She knew her mother well, and the incident of stripping in the main hall wasn't even the first time. The fact that she had reached marriageable age without any suitors was largely due to this. The Marquis residence was bustling with people, and such stories couldn't be hidden. In the capital, who didn't know that William had a beloved concubine, adored beyond measure? She was highly skilled in martial arts and so enchanting that William often lost control. The traces of their passion could be found all over the backyard of the Marquis residence, under the moonlight, by the stream, anywhere they felt the urge, they would strip and indulge. The servants of the Marquis residence had long grown used to it. With a mother like that, what respectable family would dare to marry her? Even Amelia herself didn't want such a mother, but what could she do? At this moment, Amelia Blake's face turned red with anger, and she covered her face before running away. Under the arrangement of the Blake family's matriarch, lunch was set up in the side hall of Anshow Hall, summoning all the concubines and their children from the Blake estate to meet Clara Blake. Chapter 27, plotting once again. The old matriarch's display of authority was deliberate. She wanted everyone in the estate to know that Clara Blake had returned and that she remained the rightful mistress of Blake estate. As the sole legitimate daughter of the Blake Marquisate, Clara held a status second only to the old matriarch and the Marquis himself.